Is the board visible? I am audible. So ठीक है? Okay. So we'll start. Okay. So in the last class, what we were talking about was, we were talking about the third hole or one of the most essential hole of a flower, that is we were talking about the endorsium or the male reproductive part, right. So from our previous classes, we remember that we have discussed about calyx, we have completed explanation on corolla, and we have just started with endorsium. What we remember, whenever we talk about endorsium, it is the third hole or it is the male reproductive part of a flower. Individual members of endorsium is called as, it is called as a stamen. Parts of a stamen is divided into two parts, that is anther filament, and in certain books you have another part that is called as the connective. What I said is, connective is nothing but a collection of sterile tissues of that stamen, right. Next, I think we have also discussed something called as Monadelpus. No, I think we have not started that, na? Start korisu niki Monadelpus last. Okay, so we have talked about anthers, no? Duta term related with anther, monothecus and dithecus or bithecus. What we remember? Anthers with one lobe or anthers with two lobes, no? Out of monothecus and dithecus, which type is most commonly available or commonly seen in nature? It is always a dithecus anther that is commonly seen. Examples of monothecus, examples of dithecus, we have written it in the last class. Similarly, we have two terms again, Polyundress and Syn Endress. Polyundress or Syn Endress will be talking about if all the anthers are, or if all the stamens are in a free condition or in a fused condition. If it is in a free condition, we will be using a word called as Polyundress, or if it is fused hoye thake, then it is called as Syn Endress, right. Next, I think in the last class, what I said is, we have started with two words, no? Cohesion and adhesion. Koisilo niki last class out? Remember? Okay, anyway, so today what we are going to do is, we are going to continue with endorsium, and today's topic would be cohesion of stamens. Heading kora, cohesion of stamens. As we have said before, not necessarily in a flower there is only one stamen, right. Ketiaba kisuman flowers or ki thake je basic etatke basic stamen thakibo pare, right. So in that condition, we will be using certain words called as cohesion and adhesion. Whenever we use these two words, we understand that we are talking about sticking together, right. Cohesion or adhesion mane ki sticking to each other, that is called as adhesion and cohesion. But there should be a difference between cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is sticking hoy, adhesion is sticking hoy. But you have to remember the two words, that is sticking together boli kwa loge loge, like parts sticking together, ne unlike parts sticking together. If we are talking about a condition where like parts stick together, we use the word what? Cohesion ne adhesion. Agote khunisan nai cohesion adhesion term gita? Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So cohesion adhesion or meaning kita ki, we'll just understand the meaning. Cohesion mane ki, if two like structures or if two like substances stick together, tak ami ki boli kau cohesion, or two unlike structures or two unlike molecules sticking together is called as adhesion. For example, if I say the sticking of two water molecules, duita water molecule hoy, duita jodi log lagi thake, In that case, আমি adhesion word to use করিম নে cohesion word to use করিম? It is cohesion. But if I say water molecules stuck to the walls of the xylem, তেতিয়া হলে কি হব? যে xylem cell আছে আৰু water molecule আছে, দুইটা কি হয়? Unlike things, and sticking of unlike things is called as adhesion. Similarly, these two words we are going to discuss here also. Cohesion of stamens, right? Under this, আমি কি লিখিম? Right? So, we are talking about a flower that has more than one stamens, and if all the stamens stick itself with each other, then we are using the word called as cohesion. And on this basis, if all the stamens in a flower is stuck together with each other, obviously they will form something called as a bundle, right? Eta flower or bahut stamens ase, gutei stamens kini jodi stick kore tetia hole ki hobo? They will form something or they will form a structure like a bundle. Depending on what is the number of bundle that you could see, there are certain terms that we need to remember. Terms like Monadelphus, Didelphus, etc. Right? So we are talking about the first one, likhasun Monadelphus stamens. Monadelphus stamen or ki monot rakhim? Mona is one, right? So, if all the stamens present in the flower sticks to each other forming just one bundle, that is called as Monadelphus. So, what is the term that is important? One bundle. Next is the examples. Where can you see such a condition? Right? So, Monadelphus, all the stamens arranged in one bundle. This is a special characteristic that is specially seen in a family called as Malvaceae. One example of Malvaceae is China rose. Monadelphus condition or keneke thakibo, the stamens would remain fused and the anthers would be free. So, all these 3 points are important, right? From both point of view, you would be asked to write maybe a paragraph or maybe the description or the definition of Monadelphus stamens with a diagram. From entrance point of view or MCQ point of view, the first question that is asked is, obviously a question to nahe, if the stamens are arranged in one bundle, the term given for that is, this is never asked. What is asked is, Monadelphus stamen is a characteristic of which family? Or maybe Malvaceae would be given and you have to identify one of the characteristics that is present in the family Malvaceae. So, from entrance point of view, the name of the family is very important. Malvaceae family tami ki condition dekha pao? Monadelphus. What is Monadelphus? One bundle. In this case, the diagram to kenuka hobo je we are talking about something like this. Just a rough diagram, okay? So, filament jiman bor thake, gutei filaments kini fused hoy thakibo aru anthers bilak ki hobo? Anthers bilak free hoy thakibo. Right? This, all the anthers would be free and the filaments. So, enukwa question ahibo pare, say in Monadelphus condition, anthers remain free or stamens remain free. So, in this condition, the stamens fuse likhiso niki. এটা কাম কৰাচোন, filaments fuse likha, this would be more proper. filaments fuse condition aru enter bilak ki free condition. Kabar audio disturb kori ase nei baru? I have just written one example, some more examples are already there in your PDF, so please write it down, okay. China rose ase, cotton ase, so some of the examples. Okay, is this over? So when in terms of cohesion of enter, the first thing that we have studied is something called as Monadelpus, that is all the stamens would be arranged in one bundle. In certain plants, what happens is we see the arrangement of the stamens in two bundles, and then we will be using a term called as diadelphous stamens. Yare points ki hobo? Again the same condition. So what would the diagram would look like? Right. So if it is arranged in two bundles, then we use a word called as diadelphous. Talking about this structure, we understand that this part represents the filaments and this part represents the anther. What about this part? Eto ki boli koy? Jot filaments kini lagi thake ba jopra originate kore, eto ki boli koy? It is called as the thalamus or the receptacle. We know that the receptacle or the thalamus is the seat of the flower. It is on the thalamus or receptacle. 4 holes are arranged, and obviously Endorsium ki hoy, it is nothing but the third hole of a flower. So third hole to hok ba calyx hok corolla hok kot arrange hoy thakbo. It will be always arranged on the receptacle or the thalamus. Again, from examination point of view, 2 questions from MCQ point of view. First, diadelphous condition is a characteristic of which family? So in the first one, since we have talked about Malvaceae, now you have to remember about Papilionaceae or the pea family. Or the question could be, in case of pea or Pisum sativum, the condition of Endorsium that you see, or you have to remember the word that is called as didelphous. That's the first question. Second question is, sometimes what happens is diagrammatic based questions could be asked, and in that case certain diagrams would be given and you have to identify which one is what, right? Monadelphous kuntu, diadelphous kuntu, from the diagram itself you need to understand. And if you have to mark which one is diadelphous or monadelphous, so obviously you have to know the terms also. But from entrance point of view, definition is not very important. What is important is the example and the specific family. Is the word diadelphous clear? Okay. So talking about cohesion, the first thing that we have studied is a term called as monadelphous. Next, diadelphous. Next, we have another condition that is called as polydelphous. So third likha, polydelphous. And as the term suggests, poly mane ki, many, no? So this time we will see a condition where the filaments or the stamens would be arranged in many bundles or more than 2. In this case also the same condition, filaments are fused and the anthers remains free. So we don't have to draw a diagram about polydelphous, right? Polydelphous or ki hobo, we can see more than 2 bundles of the stamens. The condition is called as polydelphous. As far as examples are concerned, not necessary. We can depict the entire condition in one family. We have different examples of plants showing this condition. So here we have written 2 examples. Castor belonging to the family called as Euphorbiaceae and lemon belonging to the family called as Rutaceae. But that does not mean the entire family will show this condition. Also Malvaceae, in case of Malvaceae, the entire Malvaceae will show what? Monadelphous condition. The entire family called as Papilionaceae will show diadelphous condition. But in this case, you cannot be saying that the entire Euphorbiaceae or Rutaceae will show this condition. We have specific examples and these 2 examples is more than enough that you study from this part. So this was number 3. Next we move to number 4. Ekini likha hol niki? Is this part over? Okay. So we have a term called as Syn Endress. In this case, the anthers remain united. At this time the filaments would remain free. Such type of condition is seen in example sunflower, right? And sunflower belongs to which family? Asteraceae, which is also called as Compositae, right? This example important. Next is this part is also important, because if you have noticed, out of the 4 terms that we have talked about, no, first 3 terms or ki asile, the anthers were free and the filament were fused, but this is just the opposite. In such a condition, the anthers remain united, but the filaments remain free. So, question to ahibo pore, a condition where the anthers remain united and the filaments are seen freely is termed as syngenesis condition. This is the only example that you will remember. As far as the diagram is concerned, something like this. And these are anthers. This is nothing but the thalamus. The term is important, the condition is important, and the example also important from entrance point of view. Is it clear? And finally, the next word we have already talked about a term that is called as Polyundress. Now we hear another word that is called as Syn Endress. So, Polyundress or Syn Endress. Polyundress condition means where the stamens are arranged freely. What is the Syn Endress condition? Where all the stamens are in a fused condition. So, if all the stamens that are present in a flower is in a fused condition, the term that is used is called as Syn Endress. As far as the diagram is concerned, actually in this case anthers are filament to basically identify koribo noaru karon gutei khini etar logot eta lagi thake. From the diagram itself you can hardly make out that which part is the anther and which part is the filament, right? Gutei is a fused or a compact structure. If this is the condition, we use a word that is called as Syn Endress, seen in members of Cucurbitaceae. One example of Cucurbitaceae, cucumber, that is an example of Cucurbitaceae. So, since we are talking about adhesion and cohesion of stamens, as far as cohesion is concerned, we see these 5 type of conditions. From entrance point of view, the most important terms that you will study from this portion is Monadelpus and Diadelphus. Monadelphus condition ami kuntu family dekhabo, Diadelphus condition kuntu basic e dekhabo. So, these two are the most frequently asked question from this part. Any doubts regarding cohesion? No, it's clear. Okay, now we have something called as adhesion of stamens, and as we have already discussed the meaning of cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion means ki sticking of like parts is called as cohesion, sticking of unlike parts is called as adhesion. When one stamen get attached or remains attached with the another stamen, that is called as cohesion. Sometimes what happens is in a flower the stamen that is present might remain in a fused condition with some other part of the flower, and when I am talking about the other part of a flower, what I mean is maybe it is attached with the sepal, maybe it is attached with the petal, right? Ketiaba ki hoy stamene log lagi thake. Ketiaba ki hoy the stamen or the male reproductive parts remains in fused condition with some other hole. Some other hole mane either it will be stuck with the petal or it will be stuck with the sepal. And in that case we will be having two terms. So, adhesion of stamens likha. Adhesion of stamens or ketaman words, you do not have to draw any diagram over here. We have a term called as epipetalous. The terms are very important. Epipetalous, as the name suggests, we see something called as a petal. So, it is obviously understood that this time we are talking about the condition where the stamen would remain fused with the petal. So, you have a petal, right? A petal to ki hobo stamen to attached to it. You cannot separate the stamen from the petal. This condition is called as the epipetalous. Seen in right. Next, solanum, S-O-L-U-N-U-M, solanum. So, epipetalous we understand, episepalous obviously fused with sepals. We have a term called as epitepalous or epiphyllous. So, this time the stamen would be attached with which part? It would be attached with a part called as tepals, and I think in the last class we have discussed about tepal. What is a tepal? Tepal ki hoy? What is a sepal? We understand. What is a petal? We also understand, but we have something called as a tepal, T-E-P-A-L. Tak ami ki boli ko? What is a tepal? It is an individual member of a specific whole. I want the name of the whole. Jeneke, if you are talking about sepal, it is an individual member of which whole? Calyx ne corolla? Kuntu whole or individual member? Individual whole of calyx, yeah. And if you are talking about petals, it is an individual member of corolla. Now we have a term called as tepal. So tepal is an individual whole or individual unit of which whole? Heard about this word? Obviously last class we discussed korisilu. Parent, parent ki hoy. So individual member of a parent is called as what? Tepal. What is a parent? A parent is a condition where you cannot identify or distinguish a sepal and a petal. Means what? If a sepal and a petal remains fused with each other, you cannot differentiate both of them, then that condition is called as parent. And another point about parent is, presence of parent is a very important characteristic of the monocots. Right. As far as the example is concerned, what I have written is members of Liliaceae. Liliaceae by lily, it belongs to which group of angiosperms? It is an example of a monocot. Lily flower dekhisan nai? Dekhisa ne kunbai dekhisa lily flower? Lily flower jodi dekhisa tar leaves bilak kenekua? Long, right? Reticulation sapo lagibo. Reticulation kenekua? Parallel, right? So these are the facts that tells us that Liliaceae obviously is a family of monocot, and if you are talking about monocot, they have a whole called as parent. What is a parent? Sepals and petals fused together. That whole is called as parent. Next, number 4. Right. Sometimes the stamens remain attached with the female reproductive part of Gynosium, and in that case the term that is used is called as Pianendras. We have two terms, one is called as Pianendras and the other is called as Gynosium. Pianendras is the condition, the structure that is formed is called as Gynosium, right. When the anther or not anther, we are talking about the entire stamen, if the stamen remains in attached or in fused condition with the Gynosium, তাৰ পিছত কি হ'ব দুইটা এটা নতুন স্ট্ৰাকচাৰ ফৰ্ম কৰিব আৰু সেই স্ট্ৰাকচাৰটোক আমি কি বুলি কম Gynosium or Gynosium. Are the two words clear? Okay. So দুইটা word মনত ৰাখিবা দেই. Okay, this was all about adhesion and cohesion of stamens. Endorsium part is quite a lengthy one. We need to know many things about the stamen. So first we have discussed about cohesion, next is adhesion, and now we will be talking about some other terms related with the stamen. So heading kora obviously the heading is not important, we have to talk about the terms. Two terms related is, the first one is didynamous condition. Likha sun. Very important. Labiatae is the name of the family. Labiatae family aru eta naam ase, that is called as Lamiaceae, right? I think you have noticed previously ami eta word likhisilu Asteraceae, sunflower family. It is called as Asteraceae. Asteraceae has another name that is called as Compositae. Similarly, in this case also we are talking about the family called as Labiatae. Labiatae is also called as Lamiaceae. These are the discussions that we have already done in the chapter called as Living World. So please refer to that portion. As far as Lamiaceae or Labiatae is concerned, Ocimum sanctum, nothing but the tulsi plant, no, that is the best example of this. So now what is the question that is asked? Question 2, Yarpra ahibo, right? A condition where the flower has 4 stamens and out of that 2 are short and 2 are long. Give a term for that condition. It is didynamous. First, ki monot rakhibo lagbo je keita stamen ase. Second, ki monot rakhibo lagbo, obviously the characteristic of which family. Right, from morphology point of view, family characteristics would bhalke poribo lagbo, karon there would be certain characteristics that would be given and you have to read those characteristics and on the basis of that identify the family, right. So that is the first term. Second is out of this 2, maximum question has been asked about tetradynamous. Brassicaceae important, and brassicaceae kuntu besi example important obviously is mustard, right. Brassica campestris is the scientific name of mustard. So, stamens, when we are talking about or we are studying about stamens, these are the terms that are very important: Monadelphus, Diadelphus, Didynamous, Tetradynamus. These are the 4 words on the basis of which maximum question has been asked. Out of all the words that we will study, a sarita bhalke poriba: Monadelphus, Diadelphus, Didynamous, Tetradynamus. And what is so important from these 3 points is obviously the families that is related with, right? Kuntu family, kuntu characteristic. Is it over? Okay. The next is another terms that are associated with stamens. Right. So, 2 terms, inserted and exerted. Inserted stamen, a flower that has an inserted stamen, when you look into the flower, anthers are not visible from outside. At that time, we will be using a term that is called as inserted, but there are certain flowers in which the anthers are protruded out or it comes out from the corolla tube, and in that case, it is the anther that you see from outside also, that is what is called as exerted. It is just for the meaning, not very important from examination point of view. খালি জানিলেই হল, ইম্পর্টেন্ট বুলি নিলিখিবা। Okay. Next is right. Now, before discussing this, whenever we talk about a stamen, this is a structure that we remember, right. Either we are talking about this type or we are talking about something like this, right. Stamen, A2 stamen, which one is common? Obviously, this one with 2 lobe. Now, talking about this anther, this part is called as the anther. So, what exactly can you find inside an anther? Anther of bhitorot ki thake? Inside the anther is structure, this sac like structure, bhitorot ki thakibo? Pollen grains, right. Even in this condition also, pollen grains would be present. What we need to read is, inside the anther, the pollen grains are arranged in something called as lobes or theca, right. So, kisuman lobes ase, lobor bhitor kisuman chambers ase. Accordingly, we have 2 terms that are monothecous anther aru Dehiscence enter. Monothecus, obviously you have one lobe, and if you are talking about Dehiscence, you see two lobes in the enter. Monothecus enter, characteristic of which family? Last class ami likhisu. Malvaceae, and talking about Malvaceae, one example of Malvaceae, hibiscus or China rose, right? And if you are talking about Dehiscence enter, it is the most common type that is seen in nature. Right. Now, another two terms related with the word monothecus and Dehiscence. If our anther is like this, it is called as ki monothecus condition. If anther has two lobes, tetiahole tak ami ki boli kom? Dehiscence condition. Inside the anther ki thakibo? Pollen grains thakibo. Pollen grains bilak ki hobo? They will be arranged in a chamber, and accordingly, what is the number of pollen chambers that you have inside this? We have another term that is called as bisporangiate aru tetrasporangiate. So, what is bisporangiate? What is tetrasporangiate? We are talking about the pollen sac. We have the stamen. In the stamen, we see the anther. Inside the anther, pollen grains are present. Pollen grains are present inside a sac that is called as pollen sac. As far as pollen sac is concerned, how many numbers of pollen sac would be present? Accordingly, we have the terms called as bisporangiate condition or trisporangiate condition. In case of monothecus, we will see that the pollen grains would be present here and it will be present here also. So, since we have two pollen sac, so we are using the word called as bisporangiate. But in such a type of a anther, what we will see is pollen grains arranged in each and every lobe. So, ultimately, what is the number of pollen sac that you will see? It is 4, and so we will be using a word called as tetrasporangiate. Question ahe, which condition is the most common one? Tetrasporangiate condition is most common. Why? Because Dehiscence condition is common, right? Next, another question could be, a monosporangiate monothecus anther or a monosporangiate monothecus anther is the characteristic of which family? Etur uporto bahut question ahe, right? Duita term relate kori pelai question to ahibo. Bisporangiate monothecus condition is the condition of which family? Malvaceae, right? So, eneke direct no pori pelai nijor questions to form kori loba. So, you can write a point here, monothecus and bisporangiate. Side or ki likhiba? Family Malvaceae, right? So, important. Ekita. Are the two terms clear? Bisporangiate and tetrasporangiate? Maximum of the angiospermic plants, we will see that the anthers have two lobes, and so we are using a word called as monothecus or Dehiscence asile no, Dehiscence to common. So, jedi Dehiscence hoy lobes keta thakibo no, duta ami dekha paisu. So, protectu lobote eta chamber thakibo ba eta pollen sac thakibo. So, ultimately pollen sac keta thakibo? 4টা. বুঝি পাইছানে? এটু যদি হয় এটু হলো, right? So, etut yate eta pollen sac thakibo, yate eta pollen sac thakibo, yate eta thakibo, yate eta thakibo, yar bhitorot ki thakibo? Pollen grains bilak thakibo, right? So, ultimately how many chambers? 1, 2, 3, 4, and so when we are talking about 4, we use the word ki tetra. So, the condition is called as tetrasporangiate. Clear? But from examination point of view, kuntu besi important? Bisporangiate or report basic question ahe. Okay. Another information about anther. right? We have to study something called as fixation of anther. Within this heading, I keep for him. So when we are talking about the stamen, we understand that it comprises of two parts, the stamen and the filament, right? The anther and the filament. A anther aru filament to keneke attached to ase, right? Talking about that, we have this heading. So when we are talking about fixation of anther, we see certain types term gita likha, tar side of diagram to dim, it will become easy. Another term for basifixed anther is innate. It is seen vesica. Basifixed, tamane the filament is attached to the base of the anther, and so we have the term called as basifixed, right. So we are talking about, right. So, first one is basifixed, second is a word called as dorsifixed anther. So, this time the filament would be attached with the dorsal side of the anther, but back side of the anther, and so it is called as dorsifixed. Adnate কেনেকুৱা টাইপ ডায়াগ্ৰাম হ'ব if you compare the diagrams no গোটেইকেইটা diagram বেলেগ বেলেগ right. So, a filament dal coat attached to SA. If it is attached from the tip to the bottom, it is called as adnate. Yate ki hoise? It is stuck only with the base. In this case ki hoy? It is stuck with the dorsal side of the anther or back side of the anther. So, accordingly we have the names. Next we have another condition. And from examination point of view, this is the most important one, versatile stamen or versatile anther kwa. So, what is versatile? A versatile is a condition where you see something like this. What is so special about this diagram? In this case also, this filament is attached on the back side of the anther, but it is just attached to a small area, and because of that, along with the wind, this anthers could keep on moving. Just think about a condition. Suppose we have a filament like this, and on top of the filament we have the anther. The anther and the filament is attached in a very small area. As a result, the entire anther can move along with the wind. ঠিক আছে, ইয়াতে যদি এন্থাৰটো আছে, এন্থাৰটো বতাহ যোন পিনে দিয়ে সেইপিনে ঘূৰি থাকিব পাৰিব. So, if that is a condition, it is called as versatile. Now, what is important is, out of the 4 terms that we have we have studied, versatile stamen upor question ahe. Key question ahe, one of the characteristic of anemophilous flowers, or if a flower has a versatile stamen, what type of a pollination could be expected in that flower? So, it is anemophilous. Anemophilous mane pollination with the help of key. We know if you are talking, if you are talking about pollination, agents of pollination, we understand that term, right? It could be water, it could be air, it could be animals, certain types of insects, etc., etc. Pollination, because of with the help of wind, is called as what? Anemophilous. Since it has to get pollinated with the help of wind, so obviously it should be light, and so that it can be moved from one place to another with the help of air or wind. So, yate ki hoy jun pine botah diye hi etu pura entire ghuribo pare, and plus it could be easily detached from the filament. This is what is called as versatile. Important word is anemophilous. Versatile stamen is a characteristic of dash flowers. It is a characteristic of anemophilous flowers. Right? So, as far as fixation is concerned, these are the 4 terms. Next is dehiscence of anther. We know inside the anther the pollen grains are present. The pollen grains needs to get dispersed, right? So, if the pollen grains has to come out from the anther needs to dehisce or burst. Talking about dehiscence, no, we have a term called as stomium. Have you heard this word? Right? Before going into details, talking about anther, if suppose we are talking about like this, right? So, a anther to period ki thakibo, pollen grains bilak thakibo. This anther needs to burst, and only then the pollen grains will come out. Now, if it has to split, we have to see from which area it gets split. Sometimes what happens is it splits lengthwise, right? Longitudinal splitting hoy, it splits and then the pollen grains comes out. Sometimes ki hoy je transverse splitting hoy, tetiahole tenekeu pollen grains bilak ulai jabo. So, accordingly we have the different terms that are associated with the dehiscence. Another point that you need to remember is, we have a word that is called as stomium. What is stomium? The line of dehiscence means what? Anther to junkinit phatibo, no, junkin jagat split koribo, we have an imaginary line, and that line is called as a line of dehiscence. If the question is asked, the anther to where does it split, or in which area it splits in the stomium. This is the area. You can also refer to this one with the moss capsule. If you remember, we have already talked about the moss capsule. Mon asene? Plant kingdom what? Moss capsule, what we have discussed, there is a specific area through which the spores comes out, right? Remember those terms called as peristome, teeth and all those, operculum, peristome, teeth, etc., etc. As of now, just a word to remember, what is stomium? Line of dehiscence. That does not mean in the anthers that me eneke eta line specifically dekhaba teneka nohoy. It is an imaginary line, and it is believed that this is the area in which the anther splits. Again, this portion is not very important from examination point of view. Dehiscence upor iman question aha nai, kintu stomium word to monot rakhiba. longitudinally split kore, and that is what is called as longitudinal dehiscence. And we are talking about longitudinal, it could be extros, intros and latros. Again I would like to repeat, not very important, ঠিক আছে, এইখিনি বেছি মুখস্থ নকৰিবা, ইমান ডিটেইলছৰ কোৱেশ্চন আহা নাই, right? Latros. Example, croton, CROTON. So as far as these terms are concerned, just to have an idea, it relates with the type of splitting that is seen. If the anther splits lengthwise or longitudinal, we use these three words, no, intros, extros or latros, just to understand. Suppose think about the anther like this, ঠিক আছে, এটো যদি anther হয় কি হবো, it has to split lengthwise, and once the anther splits, what you will see is two edges, no, এটা এনেকুৱা round বস্তু এটা যদি split কৰে তেতিয়া কি হবো, এনেকুৱা দুটা edge পাম না নাপাম. So depending on এই দুটা edge কোন পিনে open কৰিছে, just imagine, I mean try to relate it with the opening of a door. In case of doors, what we see, sometimes the door might open towards the outer side, sometimes the door might open towards the inner side of the room, right? Similarly, if this is the anther, these two sides, no, sometimes কি হবো যে এনেকে বাহিৰলে মেল খাই যাব আৰু তাৰপিছত pollen grains বিলাক ওলাই যাব. যদি এনেকে বাহিৰলে মেল খাই যায়, it is called as extros. Sometimes what happens is it will split, but the two edges will move towards the inner part, right? যদি বাহিৰলে ওলাইছে তেতিয়াহলে কি হ'ব, extros. যদি দুইটা সাইড ভিতৰলে সোমাই আহে, in spite of that also we will see that the anther is splitted, right? It was originally like this, it had splitted, but the two edges will fold inside. That is called as intros. And if you are talking about the most common one, this is the anther, it will split just like that, it is called as latros. Latros মানে কি, বা lateral sides is nothing but the side of the anther. Just to have an idea about this, you don't have to buy heart. Yes, sir. Leguminosae. Legumes, no? Okay, so we see certain anthers that splits lengthwise. So we have this term. Second is, not necessarily all the anthers will split in this way. We see transverse splitting also. Talking about transverse splitting, what we understand this time, this way, right? This way. E phalibo keneke majot phali jabo. Ladies finger scientific name to kitaba ahe, Abelmoschus esculentus. So depending on how the anther gets splitted, Either we see longitudinal splitting or we see transverse splitting, or we see conditions like valvular, porous and irregular. As far as irregular is concerned, we understand that they do not have a fixed pattern. Coat split koribo, they do not have a fixed area. Any part of the anther might get split. I mean, it might split, and from there the pollen grains might come out. Not necessarily they will follow all these patterns, right? This is what is called as irregular. As far as valvular is concerned, have you heard the word called as valve? VALVE. Heartot valve thake na thake? Thake? What is a valve? At the simplest meaning of a valve, how will you understand? It is nothing but a lid, LID, thakoni, right? So just think about a container that has a lid, right? A container ase, container to eta lid ase, container to bondho hoye asile, khulile ki hobo? One part will come up, right? That is what is called as lid or valve. So what happens is, if you are talking about this as the anther, right? In terms of splitting, ki hobo? Yare eta part khuli jabo. Right, one part will get splitted. So originally enake asil eta part like a lid will open up, and this is what is referred to as valve. Again, I would like to say, not very important from examination point of view, just to have an idea, it will open up like the lid of a container, and so this condition is called as valvular. Next, coming to porous. Porous ot keneke hoy je we have this as the anther. A pore would be formed here, right, and the pollen grains will come out from this pore, and if this is a condition, then we are using the word called as porous. So what we can conclude is, if you are talking about dehiscence of an anther, the anther, depending on plants to plants, they will dehisce in different ways. Some will split longitudinally, some transversely, and some others will follow such type of splitting. Any doubts from this section? VER, verbena. ঠিক আছে? Okay. Any more doubts? No. So this is all the information that you have to study about the male reproductive part of a flower, that is Endorsium. So Endorsium or part of proof from examination point of view, key important, the terms that we have discussed, especially Monadelphus, Didelphus, Didynamous and Tetradynamous condition. Kuntu family characteristic, this is the part that we will study more, right? And obviously the two terms bisporangiate and tetrasporangiate. Which one is common? Tetrasporangiate is common. Bisporangiate condition is a characteristic of which family? It is a characteristic of the family Malvaceae. Example of a Malvaceae, China rose is the most common example of Malvaceae. That does not mean that that is the only example of the entire family, right? We will be discussing certain examples of respective families, and at that time we will be talking about more examples. As of now, Malvaceae boli hunile, just remember China rose. Asteraceae boli hunile, remember sunflower. Brassicaceae, if you hear, remember brassica or mustard, right? Lamiaceae or labiate, you can remember ocimum, you can remember leucus. We have already talked about leucus aspera. If you remember, we have discussed something called as what? Inflorescence, and under that heading we have talked about special type of inflorescence. That ki porisilu? Hypenthodium porisilu, Scythium porisilu, no? Aru, we have talked something called as verticilliaster. One example of a verticilliaster is ocimum. Verticilliaster condition or type of inflorescence is a characteristic of which family? It is a characteristic of the family called as Lamiaceae, which is also called as Labiate. Example of that, ocimum, and another example is leucus. So once we are done with the explanation, as I have said before, not manke ki koriba short note likiba, protective family eta characteristic jikhini porisa beleg separate kori accumulate kori loba. That will make your study easier from entrance point of view. Okay. So talking about the third hole of a flower, we have completed the information. Next, we have to talk about the female reproductive part, or the fourth hole or the innermost hole, that is gynosium. So heading koriba gynosium. So, what we know, female reproductive part of a flower, individual member is called as কি বুলি কয়? Carpel, or it is also called as, if I use a word pistillate flower, what will you understand? It is a flower that has only the female reproductive part. Pistillate condition, a flower with only the female reproductive part, right? We have a term called as pistillode. What is pistillode? A sterile pistil is called as pistillode. Remember, while we were talking about Endorsium and stamens, we have talked about a word called as staminode, right? So, duta word, eta hol staminode or eta hol pistillode. What is a staminode? A sterile stamen is called as a staminode. What is a pistillode? A sterile pistil is called as a pistillode. Next is Carpel, right? Anthers ami jeta stamen okta koisilu, we have said that not necessary a flower will always have only one stamen. We have seen the examples of so many plants with more than one stamen, what is the arrangement of the stamen, etc., etc. Similarly, when we are talking about the female reproductive part, as far as the carpel is concerned, not necessary there would be always one carpel, right? If there are more than one carpel, then if the carpel are arranged or if they remain in a free condition, we have a term for that, and if all the carpels present in our flower remains in a fused condition, we have another term. Again, from examination point of view, obviously the terms are important. Syncarpous condition, apocarpous condition. In case of stamen, ami ki porisilu Polyundress aru Syn Endress. Yate ami duta word ki porisu apocarpous aru syncarpous, right? Example di dia apocarpous or pisot ami bhalke examples bilak korim. Renunculus. Renunculus swamp. It is not like this that whenever I write an example or whenever you study an example, it is just this point that you will remember. When you study, keneke poriba, you have to try to collect all the points related with any of the example that you have already studied. For example, if you talk about brassicaceae or you talk about mustard, jiman bilak information poriso gutekhini monot rakhibo lagibo. Jeneke ami ki porilo, tetradynamous condition seen in case of brassicaceae. Second, remember we have talked about a condition called as cruciferous flowers, that is also a condition of brassicaceae. So ki koriba je all the informations together, make a short note and then you study. Similarly, why I am talking about that is because we are talking about the example of a plant that is called as Renunculus, and Renunculus boli kole the informations that you remember. First we will remember that this is an example of apocarpous condition. Second, Renunculus is an example of a water plant. What is more interesting about this plant is this plant shows something called as heterophily. What is heterophily? Presence of two different types of leaves in the same plant is called as heterophily. So, question ketiaba diye, give an example of heterophily or example of a plant that shows heterophily, it is Renunculus. Heterophily, tamane adult plant ase, duita plant ot ki ase, so you see different structures of leaves, right? And suppose we are talking about Renunculus. Renunculus, as I said, is a water plant, right? The leaves that are above the water are broad and lobed, right? Enekwa. Aru, there it has leaves. Some of the leaves are underwater also. These are not roots, okay? So it has, this is water. It has two types of leaves. Right. So, lobe leaf or dissected leaf, two types of leaves in the same plant, the condition is called as heterophily. The next point to be remembered is under what condition did this plant developed two different types of leaves. Duta se different leaves ho se because of what? Because of yare condition to ki boli kom? Heterophily. And what resulted in heterophily? Plasticity, right? What is plasticity? Changes that occurs in an organism because of the environmental factors. It is called as plasticity. The morphological features or the morphological characters that develops because of the environmental condition is called as plasticity. Plasticity mane ki? Changes. Kihor karone change hoy? Environmental conditions or karone change hoy. So, if you are talking about a water plant, if this plant had broad leaves in this position, tetiyahole ki holeten? Because of the waves of the water, the leaves would what? Get broken down. So, that is a morphological adaptation that they have adapted, and that is what is called as plasticity. Because of plasticity, the condition they have developed is called as heterophily. One example of a plant that shows heterophily is Renunculus. That is not the only example. Another example of a plant is coriander, right? So, coriander hawk, Renunculus hawk, eblake ki dekhai? Heterophily dekhai. This was something extra. Okay, coming back to Carpel. So, we understand the two terms, that is syncarpous and apocarpous. Next, as we have said that not necessary a flower will have only one carpel, it could be more than one also, and accordingly we have other terms related. So, amar aru ketaman terms ase jene monocarpellary. I think the terms are clear. Monocarpellary, adult carpel, right? If you are talking about bicarpellary, the flower will have 2 carpels. Similarly, a condition called as tricarpellary. Tricarpellary condition is a common condition in case of monocots. Example could be Liliaceae. Another example could also be Poaceae. Similarly, we have tetracarpellary, pentacarpellary, etc. Right, depending on the number of carpels that is present in the flower. Next, aru ketaman terms ase. Since we are talking about the female reproductive part is called as the carpel. If you are talking about parts of carpel, keta part thake? Stigma, yeah, 3. Style and ovary. Inside the ovary, what you will see is the ovule, right? And this part would be called as thalamus of the receptacle, right? Depending on the position of the ovary, we have certain words also. Do you remember we have already talked about certain types of flowers while we were discussing flowers, no? Ketaman words ami use korisilo. Mon asene? Superior ovary, inferior ovary, inferior superior ovary. Remember the names: epigynous flowers, hypogynous flowers, aru perigynous, right? So this is the part that we have already discussed during the discussion that we have made during the topic called as flower. So position of ovary kenekwa thakibo pare? There could be 3 positions. And what are the 3 positions? Superior ovary, inferior ovary, aru superior inferior ovary or semi, right? So ekini jehetu agote discuss koriso, so we will not be discussing. Accordingly, we have the terms called as a flower having a superior ovary is called as, a flower having an inferior ovary is called as epigynous, hypogynous, etc., etc. Tinta word: epigynous, hypogynous, perigynous. What I said from examination point of view, maximum question has been asked about the examples of perigynous, right? Rose and plum. Tar upor basic questions ahise. Next is we have to talk about this part also. We know what an ovary is. Inside the ovary, ami ki dekha pao? Ovules, right? As far as the ovules are concerned, ovules get transformed into what? Ovules get transformed into seed after fertilization, right? As far as number of seeds that are present in the fruit is concerned, we cannot be saying that each and every fruit will have just 1 seed or 2 seeds, etc., etc. There are certain fruits that have only 1 seed, there are certain fruits that have many seeds, right? And where exactly the seeds are arranged in the ovary, right? So the best way to understand this is, I think you have seen a lemon. Have you ever cut a lemon in a transverse section? Nemu kati paisa nai? Longitudinally to sobe kate, right? Transversely ketiyaba kati paisa nai? Or maybe you have seen this one also. Why do we have to go for a lemon? We can always take the example of this any citrus, no? Orange, right? If you cut a lemon or a orange transversely, ami ki dekha pam? Enuka eta round structure, right? Aru tate ami ki dekha pai? Eneka kisman segments dekha pam aru yate ki thakibo? Ovules bilak thakibo, right. So, ultimately what we say is when we are talking about a ovary, sometimes what happens is our ovary is divided into certain chambers, and instead of chamber we are using the word called as locules. Not necessary each and every ovary will have more than one chamber. There are examples of ovary that has one chamber, there are examples of ovary that has two chambers, 3-chambered ovary, or more than 3-chambered ovary, right. Instead of chambers we are using the word locule. So, what is a locule? It is a chamber. Which chamber are we talking about? The chamber that is present inside the ovary, and within the chamber what you will see is chamber kot ase ovary bhitorot, chamber bhitorot ki ase ovules bilak ase, right. So, again the terms that are associated, we have certain terms like are the words clear? Unilocular, bilocular, trilocular, pentalocular, etc., right. So, what is locule? Nothing but the chamber. Where will you find the chamber? Inside the ovary. If the ovary has just one chamber, it is said to be a unilocular ovule. If the ovary is divided into two chambers, it is called as a bilocular ovule, and similarly the explanation for trilocular, tetralocular, etc. Now, since we have an idea about the locules that are present inside the ovary, the next point of discussion would be something called as placentation, right. So, the next ami ki poribo lagibo placentation. What exactly is placentation? Placentation is nothing but arrangement. Arrangement of what? Arrangement of ovules. Where will the ovules be arranged? Obviously inside the ovary, right. So, if you want to make a study about the arrangement of ovules inside a ovary, that study would be called as what? Placentation. According to the number of chambers that are present in the ovary is concerned, different types of placentation could be observed, right. So, obviously the arrangement of the ovule will depend on what? It will be depending on the number of chambers or locules that is present inside the ovary. Jodi eta chamber thake, seeds bilak ba ovules bilak kot thakibo, jodi duta chamber thake, ovules bilak kot thakibo. So, this study is called as placentation. Okay. So, again you have to be more precise. What I said, the ovules are always present inside the ovary, right. The study is called as placentation, but you have to be precise where exactly in the ovary. If suppose we are talking about this as the ovary, so ovules kot thakibo inside the ovary, but at which part? We will see in certain conditions the ovules are present in the center. There are certain plants jot niki gutetue ovary hobo, ovules bilak center thakibo. Ketiaba ki dekho gutetue ovary hobo and the ovules would be arranged in the edges, right. So, the position of the ovules depends or it differs from plant to plant. Not necessary at always the ovules would always be arranged exactly in the center, right. Now, the question is, where are the ovules arranged inside the ovary? Inside the ovary, we have a group of tissues that is called as placenta, right. So, ovary bhitorot ki thakibo kisuman tissues thakibo, he tissues khini ki boli kom placenta. It is the placenta which stores or which holds the ovule. So, if the question is asked where exactly can you find the ovule inside the ovary, the answer would be wherever the placenta is present, right. So, a gute ovule tot yate a gute ovary tot ovule jodi centerot ase, we understand that the placenta is in this position, right. If you are talking about this as the ovary and we see the ovules arranged at this part and not here, why? Because the placenta is present in this area, right. Placenta ki hoy? A group of nutritive tissues that gives food to the developing ovules, right? Jote placenta thakibo, tate ovules will arrange hobo. According to the position of the placenta, we will see different types of arrangement, and accordingly we have something called as placentation. Is the term understood? Buji paisa ne? Tumanke buji paisa? Placenta. What is placenta? Right? Next is types of placentation, right? So, in different plants we see different type of arrangement of the ovules, and accordingly if you are talking about types of placentation, ami kenuwa dekho just 6 different type of placentation is seen. From examination point of view, many question has been asked from this part. What are the things that you will study from this part? First, diagrammatic questions. A placenta or a particular type would be drawn and you have to identify which placentation the diagram belongs to. Second question is examples of a specific placentation. If I use a word, suppose central placentation, so central placentation or examples janibo lagibo, right? If I use a word superficial placentation, example of superficial placentation, that's the second question. Third question is out of the 6 type of placentation, which placentation is the most advanced one? So that is the third question that you have to remember, right? Sota type porhim nohoy, so sota type or kuntu. So I think you all have got the PDF. I think all of you have got the PDF. Paisa ne PDF too? So be PDF paisa nai? Ekhini poa nai no? Aji pai jaba june poa nai. So what I will do is, as far as the note is concerned, no, moi protekto bostu ekdom details or likhi ni diu. We are just going for the understanding part in the class. As far as the note is concerned, obviously you can write it down from the PDF itself. Will that be okay? And after the class, as usual, video lectures will have to paye jaba no, previously recorded video lectures. Tarpra sai pelaiu likhi lobo pariba. Okay. Is the term placentation understood? Buji paisu no? Okay. So talking about types of placentation, we have the first one that is called as marginal. What is a marginal placentation? A marginal placentation is the arrangement of the placenta on the margin of the ovary. Moi agote ki koisu je placenta to kot ase no, accordingly we have the terms. So if I am using the word called as marginal placentation, we understand that you have a ovary, it is on the margin that you have the placenta, and if the placenta is present in the margin, then obviously the ovules would be present in the margin itself. That is one understanding. Next is, whenever you hear this word marginal placentation, you have to remember the example of a pea pod. Janu no, motor. Dekhisu no? Motor to sobe dekhisa. No. So in case of a pea, the pea looks something like this, right? So if you split the pea, where exactly can you find the ovules? Ovule kun khini hoy. The entire pea pod is nothing but the ovary, and the part that we eat is the ovule. So if this is the ovary, so inside the ovary, ami ki dekha pam? Ovules bilak dekha pam, right? Ovules bilak kot thake? A2 bitor lagi thake. It gets or it remains stuck with the margin, right? Why it remains stuck with the margin? Because the placenta is present in the margin, and so this type of a placentation is called as marginal. So if suppose in the exam such type of a diagram is given and you are asked to identify the placenta, I think it will be easy, no? P, you have to remember, one and only example that you remember is P. So in case of P, this would be the diagram that is given. Where are the ovules? It is arranged in the margin, and so this type of a placenta would be called as ki marginal. Eblak ki hoy? Ovules, no? Ar gutei structure to ki boli ko? Ovary. Example of marginal. P, right? Marginal placentation in case of P would be represented by two diagrams. This is the first diagram. Another way is right. So, duta diagram di dibo, you have to identify. A2 delay, it becomes easy. We understand that we are talking about this P, right? But this type of a diagram could also be given. This diagram does not tell us that this is a ovary which has just a single ovule. Hetu nohoy. Ovule kiman ase? Ovule bahut ase. Kintu diagram to tenikoa kiya hoise because they have just cut a TS of this portion. Right. So, if you cut a TS of this portion or maybe you cut a TS of this portion, the TS will look something like this, right. So, you have a chamber with one ovule. So, marginal placentation or duta diagram monot rakhibo lagibo, right. So, first type of placentation is marginal. Marginal placentation represented by two diagrams, this one and this one. Second example is the best example of marginal placentation, or it is seen in the P family, or the best example is P. And if you talk about the P family too, it's a common word, no, or it's a common name. To be more scientific, P family is also called as, it is called as Leguminosae. Is the point understood? বুজি পাইছো নে কিবা ডাউটস আছিলে? Okay, so this was about the first one. Next, the next placentation is exile. Just look into the diagram, okay? Right? So, এইবিলাক কি হয়? Ovules, right? এই গোটেই structure to কি হয়? Ovary. Inside the ovary, what you can see is chambers, no? কিমান chambers আছে? 3, right? Ovules বিলাক ক'ত arrange হৈ আছে? Center. So, such type of a diagram would be called as what? Exile placentation. You have to see the diagram very properly, right. So, in case of exile placentation, the ovules would always be arranged in the center, but that information itself is not sufficient, because we will be talking about another placentation where the ovules are arranged in the center, and that at that time we will be using a word called as free central. So, in case of free, ma akiye dim, thik ase, exile placentation diagram buji paiso? Etc. What is so special about exile placentation? Ovary has septa. What is septa? These. বুঝি পাইছো? We have a placentation called as free central. In this also, this is the ovary and the ovules would be arranged in the center. Right? Eblak ki hoy? Ovules. Ovules kot ase? Center. Etu ki hoy? Ovary. In this case also, the ovules are arranged in the center. In this case also, the ovules are arranged in the center. What is the difference? Yate septa present, yate into septa absent. Is the point clear? So, this is the way that you will identify the diagram of the placentation. So, in case of free central, example dianthus, ইয়াৰ ওপৰত বহুত question আহিছে, right? So, question কেনেকৈ সুধিছে, give an example of a plant that has free central placentation. Give an example of a plant that has exile placentation. Exile placentation or tomato example to be that important, right? Free central or dianthus. Dianthus is also called as pink, right? So, dianthus or pink, this most important example of free central. Difference between the two, one has septa, the other one does not have septa. So, this have locules. A2 से दी question है, the ovary has how many chambers? It has just one chamber. So, we will be using a word that is called as unilocular ovary. Clear? और याते केटा आसा आमी तीनटा chamber देखा पाइसु, एकाने we will be using a word called as trilocular ovary. Clear? Next. The next type of placentation is parietal placentation. Very, very important. Parietal placentation kole first important key diagram, right? Second important key the example. Example key Brassicaceae কোৱা লগে লগে কি হ'ব, mastered, right? So, as far as the diagram is concerned, we will see the ovary, right? And in this ovary, the ovules would always be arranged like this. Important আমি কি পঢ়িম, diagram to sum, right? And the point to identify is the ovules would look like ki, it will look like a garland, mala dalor nisna lagise nai. So, ultimately jodi enukwa eta diagram ase jot niki ekdom side ole ovules berak arrange hoye ase. So, this placentation is called as parietal. It is seen in what? It is seen in the family called as Brassicaceae. As far as this diagram is concerned, another important point about parietal, if you see a diagram like this and the question is asked, how many chambers does this ovary consist of or has? I mean diagram tot ki dekhiso, one, right? But in case yate to aru septa tepta nai, so ovary chamber kiman ase, eta chamber. So, we generally have to use the word what? Unilocular ovary. But in case of Brassicaceae, no doubt it has parietal placentation, but it has bilocular ovary. Normally parietal placentation on ki thakibo lage, unilocular hobo lage, kintu Brassicaceae ami ki dekha pao, bilocular ovary. So, in case of Brassicaceae, bilocular ovary, and to ovary to be bilocular ki thakibo lagibo, duta chamber thakibo lagibo. So, duta chamber ki hoy, why bilocular? Because they have something called as রেপ্লাম, রাইট? সো তাহাঁতৰ কি হয়, এখন ফলস সেপ্টা থাকে, very, very important characteristic of the family Brassicaceae. Question ahe, presence of replum is a characteristic feature of which family? Presence of replum is a characteristic feature of the family called as Brassicaceae. First point. Second, because of the presence of this replum or false septum, the ovary looks what? It looks bichambered or two-chambered. So, Brassicaceae ki thakibo, parietal placentation but bichambered but two-chambered ovary. Clear? How will you identify the diagram? If you see a garland like this, it's more than enough to identify that we are talking about parietal. So, parietal to bhalke poriba, examples saba, diagrams saba. Please pay interest to the word called as replum. Replum is a chief characteristic of the family Brassicaceae. What is replum? A false septum. Ekdom specifically ami originally ami tenuka ekhon septa dekha napao, gradually form kore, so it is called as a false septa. Do you have any doubt regarding this? Ne buji paisu? So ki point porhiba already moi koi disu no, so teneke saba ha. Next is the fifth one. We have to talk about 6 types. The fifth one is basal placentation, and as the name suggests, what we understand that at this time we will see the ovule that is arranged at the base of the ovary. So ovule to kot thake, where are the ovules located? Accordingly we have the different names. If the ovule is present in the margin, the placentation is called as marginal. If it is present in the center without septa, it is called as free central placentation. If the ovules are present in the center but you see the presence of septa, then it is called as exile. If you see the presence of the ovule in the peripheral region, then this is called as parietal. Similarly, what is basal? If you see the ovule arranging itself at the base of the ovary, it is called as basal, right? So basal placentation or ovule to kot thakibo, base of the ovary. Next is important key, diagram, right? First point, diagram. Second is basal placentation is considered as the most advanced type of placentation, right? Diagram is important, this statement is important. Now the question is, if basal placentation is the most advanced type of placentation, where will you see such type of placentation? Or give an example of a plant that has a basal placentation. Kot dekha baba. Most advanced, yeah, most advanced যদি হয় তেতিয়াহলে most advanced plant dalore dekha pam. Most advanced plant বুলি কলে obviously angiosperm group, and out of the angiosperm the most advanced is obviously monocots. So dicot family most advanced family aru monocots or jiman family ase tar bhitor most advanced ei gutei gitate ami ki pam basal placentation pam, right? So you will see a ovary that has a single ovule. Imanderi, ami jete exile placentation akisilu no, what is the number of ovules? Obviously more than 1. If you are talking about marginal placentation, the number of ovules more than 1. Even in free central or parietal, the number of ovules is always more than 1. But in case of basal placentation, what is the number of ovule that you can see? Single ovule, right? Another point that you have to remember is reduction of characters is always considered as an advanced characteristic. For example, I think you have heard about the two terms dicots and monocots. What's the basic difference? One that has 2 cotyledons and one that has 1 cotyledon, right? So kuntu advanced, obviously monocot is advanced, right? Because it has 1 characteristic, 1 cotyledon. So jetia enke characters bor komi ahi thake, heituk ami ki buli bhabo, advanced character buli bhabo, right? Similarly, if you are talking about the number of ovules present inside the ovary is concerned, there are so many examples where the ovule number is more than 1. But out of all the condition, which characteristic is considered as the most advanced? Where the number of ovule is single. Sobotse kom jetia thakibo, hetu sobotse advanced hobo. Clear? Okay. So basal placentation diagram, etu ki hoy? Ovary, right? Kot dekha pam? Monocots. Right? What is Asteraceae? The most advanced family of the dicot. What is Poaceae? The most advanced family of the monocot. Whenever we talk about dicots and monocot, it does not mean the dicot has only one family. Both families are, no? If you are talking about monocots also, it comprises of many families. Out of all the families, most advanced family of monocot. Right? And if you are talking about Asteraceae, right? So, basal placentation, what is important? The diagram is important. Ovule keta ase, single. As far as chambers is concerned, keta chamber ase? One chamber. So, it is unilocular ovary with a single ovule seen in the advanced plants. What are the advanced plants? Asteraceae and Poaceae. One example of Asteraceae, sunflower. One example of Poaceae, rice, wheat, etc. Right? And finally, we come to the last one. Superficial placentation. To have an idea about superficial placentation, have you seen the seed of a lotus or have you seen the thalamus of a lotus? Lotus or thalamus to dekhisa niki? Obviously dekhisa. Lotus flower to dekhisa nai? Hatere sui saisan nai ketiaba? Dekha paisa ne? Puja bilakot diye ni diye lotus or flower. Puja suja hole ghorot ami lotus kini anu ne nanu. So hey thari dal dekhisan nai lotus or. Right, we see something like this, no? Lotus, jedi fula nai, the bud. This is the stalk. Here we have a round structure, and this is where it is arranged, right? So, ebilak to ki hoy, the petals. Edal ki hoy, the stalk. This one, thalamus. Or this is the portion where you see the ovary, and inside the ovary, what you will see is the ovule. If you have not seen তেতিয়াহ'লে তাৰ বুজাবলৈ অকমান প্ৰবলেম হৈ যাব কিন্তু লোটাস সিডছৰ এটা নাম আছে ডু ইউ নো দিস ওয়ার্ড মাখানা বুলি যোনটো কয় ৰাইট মাখানাটো কি হয় লোটাস সিড যেনেকে মেজ সিড ভাজি দিলে কি হ'ব পপকৰ্ন ৰাইট সো লোটাস সিড ভাজি দিলে কি হ'ব মাখানা ৰাইট সো লোটাস সিডটো ক'ত থাকিব ওভাৰি এটা এনেকুৱা এটা ওভাৰি য'ত নেকি বহুত বিলাক চেম্বাৰছ আছে আৰু তাত বহুত বিলাক সিডছ আছে This is an example of superficial. Since a superficial placentation, what is the number of ovules that you see? Many. If a ovary has many ovules, then this character would be considered as key. One ovule, most advanced character, many ovules, most primitive character. So, out of the 6 type of placentation, which is the most primitive one, superficial condition is considered as the primitive, which one is the most advanced, basal condition is considered as the most advanced. So, in case of superficial, the terms that we can use as far as chambers are concerned, kiman chambers ase, many chambers. So, we can use the word called as a multilocular ovary, right. Septa present or absent, obviously present. So, we see chambers. Next is most primitive examples of superficial lotus, water lily, etc. Right. So, I think that is all for today. So, in this class what we have discussed is we have talked about gynosium, we have started with gynosium and we have discussed about placentation. Placentation, what is the point that you need to study? Diagrams, very important, and examples also very important, and the specific characteristic of the things that we have discussed. And out of these, are ki important? Most advanced placentation, most primitive placentation, and something that is related with parietal placentation. Have to remember the word or special characteristic of brassicaceae, have to remember the word called as rhaplum or the false septum. Because of the presence of the rhaplum, the ovary is divided into how many chambers? It is divided into 2 chambers. So, bilocular ovary with parietal placentation is a characteristic of which family? It is a characteristic of brassicaceae. In rest of the families, if it has parietal placentation, then the chamber would be always unilocular. I think that's all for today. If you have any doubts, please ask, or else we can wind up the class. As far as the PDF is concerned, A2 portion oloke PDF to pai jaba. Okay then, please go through the video lectures once more. Yeah, please ask, please ask. Yeah, welcome. Bahut naam ase. This or that. ঠিক আছে ওকে আৰু কিবা ডাউট আছিল নেকি হা ফ্যামিলি টু সুপারফিশিয়াল হয় ফ্যামিলি বুলি আমি ঠিক তেনেকৈ স্পেচিফিকলি নপঢ়োঁ খালি এনেকৈ পঢ়িম যে সুপারফিশিয়াল প্লেসেন্টেশন ক'ত পায় ওৱান এক্সাম্পল ইজ লোটাছ দ্য আদাৰ এক্সাম্পল ইজ ৱাটাৰ লিলি right specific family নামটো ইমান ইম্পৰ্টেণ্ট নহয় okay okay thank you welcome